I'm Jay, an arts manager, educator, writer, musician, producer, and professional daydreamer.
And I am Miguel, a musician, arts administrator, educator, and lover of all things nerdy.
And this is Playblack, a podcast dedicated to nerddom reviews and hot takes on arts and culture and the human experience from the perspective of two melanated artists.
Just your typical anime bros, but with like master's degrees and stuff.
And therapy.
So much therapy.
Yeah,
All for
so
therapy.
today's a little bit different, okay? For the second time this season, we are going to be interviewing an author. And boy, what a conversation do we have. So today's guest is Tobi Ogundiran, who wrote Shadow of the Fall, which releases soon. Let's actually look up when that releases. But amazing, a very acclaimed author. We'll go a little bit into his bio and a little bit more about what the book is about in the interview. But really exciting stuff, and you all should buy it. It's a novella. I read it in, I want to say, like 90 minutes, 2 hours.
Yep.
So good. I wanted more from it immediately. I was transported to the world. I texted Miguel like 30 seconds into reading, being like, oh, this is going to be good. I could just tell by how the writing's flowing. It's going to be good. And we love that. We love that. So this is going to be a good episode for all you book lovers out there.
Yeah. Okay. I think it comes in July 23rd. So
That sounds right. Yep.
A couple of weeks. And I think I was looking at the audiobook. I think that comes out in early August as well, if y'all are audiobook readers.
Okay.
Before we get to the interview, we do have a really cool event coming up. It's a Playblack summer, y'all, because we have scenes on a beach. Basically, we're doing trivia with live actors. Live actors are going to be playing out some really cool scenes from popular IP that y'all will know. And we're going to be asking y'all trivia questions about those scenes. Y'all can win prizes, like actual prizes that like get you cool shit and stuff.
The hikey, like I would wish that I could get. You know, if we were a team,
we clean up because we got that lore brain, son. Yeah, I don't know why we just got like hood with it, but
it's on site. That's why.
Because it's on site. But Scenes on the Beach is happening on Sunday, July 21st at 4 p.m. Carson's Beach. It's at the gazebo picnic area around that Mother's Rest area of Carson's Beach. So come hang. It's a free event. So please just come and enjoy yourselves.
Get some sun, get some sea,
Yeah, it is sponsored by the Better Beaches program and DCR and Save the Harbor. So it is going to be a wonderful event. We'll put all that stuff in the doobly-doo thing on the bottom here. So you can see all the links. But Jay, is there anything else we got to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we should get into this interview so they can see what we saw and hear what we heard. Amen.
Amen. Without further ado, here's the Playblack.
Hello, Playblack fam. We're excited to do a special episode featuring a special guest. We are joined today by Tobi Ogundiran, who is an amazing author and an award-winning author of Jackal Jackal, which is a collection of 18 dark and fantastical tales. He's been nominated for the British Science Fiction Association Awards, Nomo and Shirley Jackson Awards. His short fiction has also been featured on the hit podcast LeVar Burton Reads, for all you Reading Rainbow friends out there, but also appears in journals such as Lightspeed, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and in several years' best anthologies. He was born and raised in Nigeria, and he now lives and works in the U.S. South. And today we'll be talking about his latest work, In the Shadow of the Fall, which Miguel will talk a little bit more about.
Yes, we spoilers really love the book. So
that's a relief. Yeah.
Right? Oh my gosh. Um, the book is about Ashake, an acolyte in the temple of Ifa, yearning for the day she's made a priestess and sent out into the world to serve the Orisha. But of all the acolytes, she's the only one the Orisha refused to speak to. For years, she has watched from the sidelines as peer after peers passes her by and ascends to full priesthood. Desperate, Ashake attempts to summon and trap an Orisha, any Orisha. Instead, she experiences a vision so terrible it draws the attention of a powerful enemy sect and thrusts Ashake into the center of a centuries-old war that will shatter the very foundation of her world. Chills. Already got them.
Light stuff, pretty breezy. Welcome, Tobi. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm excited. I'm happy to be here.
Right. Excellent. So, I mean, I guess we'll just start with the basics. What inspired this story from you?
So I guess there's like it was a confluence of different inspirations that sort of came together to inspire the story. So firstly, I mean, like Norse and Greek mythology and Greek gods are ubiquitous in literature and in movies and pop culture, and I'd always wanted to see Yoruba gods also represented in literature and pop culture because I feel like they're pretty good, pretty cool, just as cool as the Norse and the Greek gods. That was the first one, so I knew I always wanted to write that, but I was waiting, I guess, for the right story.
Sure.
And then I think sometime in 2019, 2020, I read Ursula Le Guin's the Earthsea books, particularly the second one where we focus on the girl, the priestess, the eating one in the temple, and that sort of sparked, that sort of was the seed, I guess, I needed to write my own story. A story that, yeah, featured gods, but they weren't like the main focus. It was much more human story with gods around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that. I mean, you actually dovetail really nicely into the next question. So, to your point, there is a lot of usually European-based mythology that exists. And what's really interesting about the word mythology for me is that for a lot of these cultures, this was their religion, right?
Absolutely.
But we now call it mythology because it's dead. But now when you're writing about Yoruba and that culture, it still exists now. So how
Yeah.
do you kind of negotiate that reality of writing that when you have people who can write you some letters about it, or even for yourself, respecting your cultural integrity and identity within that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's also something I grappled with or kept at the back of my mind while writing it. That this was a culture that a religion, so to speak, that very much existed. In the present day, there are practitioners in present day Nigeria, but also the descendants of the slaves in Brazil and some Latin American countries who still practice this religion. So it's an active religion. So what I did was take the gods, and it's not a one for one sort of like true to the actual mythology and the culture and the cosmology, but it's much more inspired by. So there are some gods who I've made up completely and ascribe powers to them. There are gods that actually exist whose powers I have retained. So I guess I would encourage readers, when reading this, to think of this not as a textbook or a deep anthropological study into the actual religion, but as inspired by these gods, the cosmology and all that. Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about this before, and a term that I've seen you use is Yoruba extraction. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Basically, I'm a Yoruba guy. I'm a present day Nigeria was, made by the British, and different tribes and ethnic groups were forcing together to create this country. And Yoruba is one of them, and we're one of the most populous ethnic groups in Nigeria, Benin, but also across the diaspora. So when I say I'm an author of Yoruba extraction, basically I identify as a Yoruba guy first before a Nigerian, which came, fairly recently. The concept of Nigeria as a country, as a state, appeared fairly recently.
Got it.
Yeah.
I know we said that the book was an anthropological text, but that was a very anthropological answer about that. So thank you for
I know.
Very true.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, I mean, reading your novel. By the way, this is a spoiler-free conversation. We're not going to spoil anything about the book because it's not out yet. But um,
Yeah.
um, your, I find that your novella deals a lot with faith and disillusionment of faith. And I was wondering, what, as an author,
Mhm.
have you dealt with those feelings of, um, oh my gosh, I've been lied to my entire life, or this thing that has been concrete in me is now shaken, like some of your characters.
Um, I would. I haven't had an identical experience to Shakez, but they have certainly been moments in my life where I was forced to, you know, question what I believed in, wonder if it was all worth it, and if what I was promised is actually was actually going to be made manifest. Um, so no, not an identical situation to Ashika's, but when drafting hers, I tried as much as possible to put myself in her situation and how I would react, to the exact same circumstances she was experiencing, where I've been fed secrets and lies all my life, and it's
Yeah.
this, it's like this onion where you keep peeling back the layers, and it just gets the plot thickens, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And her reaction to it, her coping with it.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of it as sort of her slow descent into apostasy,
Mm.
total lack
Mm.
of faith, and all
Mm.
that. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
So kind of talking about how your personal journey either finds itself or doesn't within the text you create. You've shared in the past that one of your favorite childhood stories, which is true for many of us, was Harry Potter. And you've also mentioned that you feel a connection to, I loved hearing this, Laszlo Strange from Strange the Dreamer Music
Oh
Nightmares.
yeah,
I love that series. I love Laini Taylor. So I was like, my
absolutely.
man.
Yeah.
Um, so those stories are both about like normal people who imagine different lives from themselves, ultimately kind of get that wish, right? Step into lives that are magical and wonderful, but then inevitably are full of darkness and pain as well. And that
Mhm.
feels like a very similar arc to Ashake's journey in the story. So, how does your connection to those stories in particular influence both this story and your work in general?
Yeah, I've always felt that there's, well, coming from Nigeria and that cultural background, the idea of magic, even though it might not really be called magic, or the idea of the supernatural, or that there's something much more than the real world around us,
Mm,
exists and is taken for granted pretty much in society. So I firmly believe, growing up and even now as a grown man, that there is wonder and magic in the world,
mm,
and it's totally possible to open a cupboard and walk into a magical world, or
yeah.
walk down an alley and find yourself in this totally fantastical area.
Mm,
So the concept of an ordinary person discovering that the world is much more
mm,
than what they imagined has always fascinated me, and it's
mm,
something I guess keeps coming up both in my reading, but also in my writing and
mm.
in the words I create. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
I, I I love that. We should all have some more wonder, right? The
Amen.
the world's a
Yeah.
bit bleak if you don't.
Oh yeah.
But speaking of bleak, I believe we are mutual fans of grimdark fantasy author Joe Abercrombie. Um,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I love me some Joe Abercrombie. I've read the entire
He's
First Law
phenomenal.
series, the
Yeah.
trilogy, the standalones, and the other
I can't wait
trilogy.
for the devil
Oh,
to be out.
I
It's
can't wait
yeah.
that the cover reveal. I was like, okay, this is gonna
Yeah.
hurt. But I was wondering, the we Jay and I constantly have a conversation of like darkness and lightness in the media that we consume. Um, do you find writing about or reading about dark topics gives you light, or is it something that kind of makes you feel the darkness more?
That's a good one. Fun fact, I also write, I get in some of my fiction, I skew towards the dark side. So I'm no stranger to the dark side. And I guess I find myself drawn towards it because it allows for more rounded exploration of the human condition.
Mm.
That sounds very pretentious, but it's totally legit, because I feel when humans are sort of put through the ringer and are undergoing some sort of ordeal, that's when the true character comes
Mm.
out, and
Mhm.
you can actually, get to experience the whole of this person, as opposed to when things are going all good and rosy and you can afford to be generous, or to be totally wonderful in your relations with other humans.
Mhm.
Things like war, tragedy, really, it's like the basis and the rawest, so to speak, of human emotion. And the way people react to those kind of situations um, is the true self, is what I believe.
Mm. So to go a little bit deeper into that, and I'm just realizing that we didn't really share much about us ourselves. We're both artists. Miguel is a musician and composer. We're both
Okay.
educators. I'm a writer and musician, and so that's like at the heart of these conversations, and also why we will never say that you sound pretentious, because those are the conversations we have all the time. But I guess to kind of probe that deeper and set up the next question is one of the conversations we're having as it relates to like this light and this dark is thinking about the effect, impact, or intention that it has on the reader, right? And so when we have this, I don't want to say disagreement, this conversation, Miguel and I, about what we're taking in, I'm always thinking, like, what is the thesis of these stories? When
Mm,
you're watching or reading something grimdark, when you're watching a Game of Thrones, when you're watching The Boys, what is it that it's trying to say about humanity? And is that a story that we have to believe about ourselves? And for me, it feels dangerous sometimes to think that, like, humans with power inevitably are going to be horrible and it's everything. And so I'm just like, we got to make sure that there's some balance in the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So that's
yeah.
kind of like where that's coming in. How does that land for you?
um that is a good question. I think, well, as writers or as creators in general, it's our job, or we sort of subconsciously try to mirror the world.
Hmm.
We observe the world and we tell stories about the world.
Hmm.
And I think the onus is on us to do that in such a way that allows for nuance.
Hmm.
You don't necessarily have to consciously have a message you want to pass across,
Hmm.
or some thesis really that you want to. I think that's for the critics and the reviewers and all that to sort of suss out by themselves.
Hmm.
But if you find a compelling story in whatever situation, then you as a creator should tell that with as much nuance. And the readers, I should expect, should also be really, nuanced and critical readers, and
Hmm.
not just taking everything at face value and be like, oh yeah, he's endorsing this.
Hmm.
I guess there might be some extreme versions. I think there's there's the anecdote or the story of Stephen King pulling one of his books from I think the book was called Rage. He pulled
Hmm.
it from print, from circulation, because it was about a school shooter, and an actual
Hmm.
school shooter took inspiration from that book. I'm just like,
Hmm.
oh no, I don't, this is not intended.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess for such extreme situations, yeah. But as creators, yeah, we have the responsibility to tell the stories in the best way, but also the most nuanced and thoughtful
Yeah.
way possible, and allow for readers and consumers of your work to pick it out,
Hmm.
basically. Yeah.
Love that. Walking down that path a little bit more. So, a takeaway that I took away from the story, Shadow of the Fall, is that the stories that we tell and the histories that we acknowledge shape society and our lived realities. It's like
Mm,
very important, that historical element. And in this country right now, there is an intentional erasure of important histories, things that we can't talk about, things we can't teach.
yeah.
What does that parallel mean for you? What inspired kind of that theme in your work as well?
Um, Again, coming back to human beings really, and society, and the way we live and move through the world and tell stories to ourselves about ourselves and our experiences and all that. If you say pick a culture or a group of people in whatever corner of the planet, and you ask them about how did this mountain come here,
Mm.
you might find in the same group different stories about that same mountain.
Mm.
And it's basically, um there's no unifying story or consensus. Each group might have different stories to sort of explain how that mountain came to be.
Mm.
And there might be a truth, so to speak, running through
Mm.
the different stories,
Mhm.
a common thread
Mhm.
that one might have to, really take apart and pick apart in order to find the actual truth. And I feel that that's a general human experience. People usually have different stories, but also, looking at it through the glaze of recollection and the fallibility of memory and
Mhm.
all that. And it's two people might experience the very same thing, ask them 20 years down the line, and they both remember slightly different
Right.
variations. And that's what, reality really is. There is that sort of like the innocent um deviation from the actual truth, but there is also the other, the opposite end of the spectrum, which is much more sinister,
Mm.
deliberate erasure of the
Mhm.
truth, which also exists in our world, in our society. And all those, all those concepts have always fascinated me
Mm.
and played a huge part in my drafting of the book, where you have a truth that is, or an event that is universally acknowledged, but
Right.
different factions remember it in different ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So within the text, something that I thought was really interesting. I'm going to see if I can say this in a way that's not spoilery. Mm, there is an antagonist who has a very specific set of beliefs
Mm.
that's tied to a very specific um, kind of deity figure, right?
Yeah.
And seems to be following very specific tenets and doing very specific things in honor of that
Hmm.
person. But there's a moment where, yeah, that's the part I don't want to spoil. There's a moment, I think you know what I'm talking about, at the end, where it's just like, what has time, what has memory done to those tenets? Like, is that actually what that person? And so I'm kind of wondering a little bit more on that, about like how the belief systems are then influenced by time and what we do in people's names. Like, what is that for you as well?
um right, I'm trying to see if we're both talking about the
Uh-huh.
same
Uh-huh.
the same point in the book. But speaking on the antagonist, yeah, there are, belongs also to this sect who have very strong beliefs
Mhm.
and these tenets that they live by. But again, time is something that always warps.
Yeah.
I mean, people, no human is static,
Right.
and people change with time. And I think like the memory is also, how we remember things is also a function of the distance and the removal from
Yeah.
that, but also different circumstances, as in the case of the antagonist.
Mm.
And established truths always, you always sort of have to revisit it and
Mm.
reestablish, or
Mm.
in the process of revisitation, sort of rework it to your current understanding of that,
Mm.
established truth, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that's what's happening with the antagonist, where
Yeah.
he's sort of deviating
Hmm.
from the established truth, but in his mind he's following everything to the letter.
I feel like what you just said is such a powerful metaphor for how we should be as humans, kind of contending with religiosity, right? Like how we're taking, or even in this country, like the Constitution, right? Like we take these hard
Oh,
truths that were contextually about that time, and
yeah.
very rarely do we re examine them in like
Hmm.
today and what it means today. And it feels like a great practice, is what I'm hearing you say.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, fascinating.
I mean, yeah, it's. I had a question for you that you already kind of answered,
Uh,
and it's basically asking like what makes the difference between a good villain and a great villain. Because I did find the your antagonist very compelling, for that very reason,
Terrifying.
that
hmm.
he thinks he's right, right? Because
Yes.
like if the best villains for me have always been villains that you can see their point of view, you can see how they got where they're going,
Hmm.
and what you're disagreeing with is the method, because it's
Absolutely.
there's like it's unethical, right? But all for the greater good. That's where you start to get spin into some issues, um, and that kind of spills into world building. I mean, world building is difficult, period. And I feel it's like it's even more difficult with a limited page count, which you do. It's a very short book. Do you
Yeah.
find that limitation is helpful, in because it focuses you, or is it kind of a restraint?
I think in my case, I would say it's helpful. I spent a lot of years really writing short fiction, so I think that's sort of primed me to make each word count, and to word build, these vast worlds and histories in a very limited amount of space. And as at the time I was writing the book, I'd become not jaded, but tired, I guess, of doorstopper fantasies, which are like bricks and really thick and the meander. And
Yeah.
I wanted something that I wanted the experience of epic fantasy without the thousand page counts
Yeah.
and um, huge maps. I wanted the feel and the experience of an epic fantasy in a really slim volume. So
Mm.
we followed we stick really closely to the plot, really one plot line with some minor side plots and all that, but sticking to the main plot as much as possible to deliver the
Mm.
story that I really wanted to tell.
Yeah. And you are
Yeah.
bloodily brutal, even with the cast characters too. It's like, no, I thought this was gonna be a whole. And it's like, no, but now they gotta go. Yeah, story.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, one of my main complaints about the book is that I wanted more of it.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I've been getting that a lot.
yeah. Do you think you'll ever make a full length novel within this world you've built, or is it going to be
um,
short fiction?
I there are definitely possibilities of a full length book, full length novel in the world. I've been a couple of ideas which I've been bouncing with my editor and agent. So yeah, never say never. You might see something in the future.
Absolutely.
Kind of related to that. So you began with novels, if I recall, like you were writing novels in the beginning and found success with short stories.
Yes.
So I'm kind of wondering now, what is your relationship? Is it one of those things where like the universe redirected you and now this space is like really, really love and you want to thrive in? Or is it just like, I'm enjoying my time here, but I'll go back here and then maybe I'll go back and forth? Like, how are you thinking about your work moving forward in terms of that?
I think so. I've always said that I came to short fiction by chance because I thought it was going to be an easier, faster path to publishing. But
Mm,
what happened was I loved it. I discovered that I was really good at crafting. There's poignant tales,
mm,
and I sort of built an audience for myself in the short fiction scene,
mm,
and but also keeping in mind my goal of being a full of a novelist, writing
mm,
actual books and all that. There are some people who never read short fiction,
mm.
and there are some people who don't really have the time, to read door stoppers, like I just said.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna keep my feet in both worlds,
Mm,
keep writing short fiction, but also longer fiction
mm.
and other forms of fiction. I like to tell stories. I tell people I'm a storyteller. So any medium that's going to allow me to tell the stories, I like to tell in the way I like to tell them. I'm
Love it.
definitely down for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
The I mean, some of your side characters are so effective. Like I'm endeared to them immediately, and obviously it's a short story, so you have to be endeared to them. What do you think is the best way to immediately forge a connection between a side character and the reader?
Ooh, a craft question. I'm taking notes, so just let me know.
Huh. I think they have to be as vibrant in your mind
Mm,
that you're the creator first and
hmm.
foremost before you actually put them on the page or before they meet the reader. So you might know their history, their backstory, most of which doesn't necessarily come onto the page, which is not necessary, but you as a creator know all this, and that
Mm,
sort of informs the writing at that
Mm,
particular point. It's like, oh, he suffered from some tragic accidents in his childhood, and that sort of colors his
mm,
every decision, even in the present moment. And just having them react to circumstances and the plot in accordance with all the backstory and the history and all that.
hmm.
Yeah.
mm,
So jumping off of that, I'm wondering. I feel like I've heard you say that you kind of enter, and I feel this way too, like a fugue state when you're writing. Sometimes of just like, here it comes and it's flowing through me and it's great. But
Yeah.
like what you just mentioned of like understanding backstory is it's pointing to plot. So how much of a story are you plotting before? How much are you leaving room for just like letting it pass through you? What's that process like?
I never plot. I absolutely hate to plot. Yeah.
Whoa.
So I take what happens is because you mentioned you're visual artists and musicians, and I'm also a musician artist, and so the story comes to me in scenes like I see it like a movie in my head.
Mm,
The opening of the novella actually came to me first, where we had the Ashake in the forest, so to speak,
mm,
and that was the spark. So, and I just started to write from there, discovering basically the plot for the first draft, and that's how I tend to write most of my stories. And after the first draft, then I go, I guess, outline in retrospect,
mm,
just to make things make sense, stitching connections between the different scenes and all that. But really, when I first approach the blank page, it's with an idea,
mhm.
an opening, and I'm just like, all right, let's see where this goes.
Wow.
Yeah. I have tried to plot, I have tried to outline, but I found that that stifled me and took the joy out of writing the
Mm,
story for me.
mm,
Yeah.
Why fight your natural inclinations, right? Like, because
mm,
Yeah.
you're gonna go back and draft and make sure that it's clean, that things are connected anyway.
Exactly.
So no, I think that's great. I love that, and I also loved how you described music and the instruments.
mhm,
And it doesn't surprise me that you're also a musician among your many
mhm.
talents that we haven't even touched all
Which we will.
which you will. Um, so and I'm trying not to spoil. Does music transport you to your most important memories?
Mm,
Oh, yes.
mm,
Yes, it does. I find, and this was even before I knew it was a thing, like in psychology or
mhm,
medicine, where sense and music are actually tied very closely to memory. I
mhm,
discovered this one as a teenager, as a child, really, that certain music that I listen to a lot at a at a time in my life.
yeah,
When I hear it, say 5, 10 years later, I remember
yeah,
vividly things that happened back then. So yeah, music definitely transports me to memories.
yeah. I read that article about like musical nostalgia and how it's like actually like happening in your brains. And I guess
Yeah.
speaking of science, so in addition to being an acclaimed author, you have also studied to become a physician. And so I'm wondering. My day job is I train artists to have careers in their arts. And very often we get a lot of artists that come in feeling like, I do this and I do this, and they feel like they have to choose. And we
Mhm.
always preach, like, don't choose. Follow all of them and find how they intersect and how they inform each other. And so I wonder, how does your artistry and your love of medicine influence and inform each other?
That is a yeah. I don't know, or I can say for sure that both influence and inform each other.
Hmm.
But growing up, I always knew I had these two career paths I wanted to pursue, being a doctor, but also being a writer.
Hmm.
And for a long time, really, once I got into medical school, I stopped writing because
Hmm.
medical school, yeah. But then in, I think, 2018, I sort of came out of this fugue of studying diseases and all that and realized this thing I loved, writing, had sort of fallen by the wayside. And
Hmm.
if I never came back to it, then I was just going to wake up at 50 years old and be like, I'd lost out or I'd abandoned this. So I had to work my way back or find my way back to writing,
Hmm.
craft time out of my day to actively pursue, this
Yeah.
passion that I had. And yeah, it takes discipline, um, time management. But if it's something you love, then, you'll always find time for it.
Hmm. Hmm. Love that.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that we always try to find time for, community is a huge like thing that we're working on here at Playblack. We're trying to build community and bring people together. You mentioned you're from Nigeria, but you also spent 7 years in Russia and now live in America. So,
Yes.
what was your experience trying to just develop community?
Oh, it was interesting. So I went to Russia in 2014, and at that point there were I mean, Russia, the black population is really scanty, but in the city I was, Penza State, it was even more scanty.
Mm.
Yeah, there were even fewer fewer black people. I think there was just three Nigerians at that point. And
Jeez.
Russia is a country where, outside of the big urban center, outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, no one really speaks or understands English. You wanna hop on the bus, you have to speak Russian. You wanna
Mm.
go to the store, you have to speak Russian. So it was a double barrier for me to immerse myself in the society. But I love languages, and I took it as a challenge, to
Mm.
learn Russian and to really master Russian and immerse myself in the society. And I came to love it. I had a really, really great time there. I met people from different parts of the world I never would have met if I, never left Nigeria.
Mm.
I got to experience different cultures, different point of view. I got to find, community. So as we're talking about community, I made community of friends, people I
Mm.
would call family today,
Mm.
and I'm really, really grateful for that experience. And coming to the States was way easier than going to Russia because speak English.
Sure.
I've been exposed to Western culture all my
Sure.
life,
Of
so
course.
it was a bit like coming home. It
Mm.
was much easier finding community people, who look like me, who think
Hmm.
like me,
Hmm.
and yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So to take that a step further, how did you find creative community? I know that you said that like for a while it kind of fell by the wayside. Do you feel like you have a sense of creative community now? How does or how does not having that community kind of affect you and your work?
So when I started writing or actively pursuing professional publishing in 2018, I did not have any creative community. Again, I was in
Mm,
Russia, writing in English, publishing in the Western sphere. So
sure.
I really had no one. It was all, but thanks to Twitter, I discovered other writers.
Mm,
This was Twitter went back when Twitter was actually the water cooler and a really good place.
mm,
I discovered other writers, like-minded writers. We got to exchange stories, critique each other's stories.
mm,
That was how I found community. And yeah, that was like in the online and the virtual space.
mhm,
Now, particularly, being in the States, which is like the center of English
mm.
publishing, I've had the opportunities to go to various conventions and
Mm.
actually see these people who have been my online
Oh,
friends for years,
mhm.
and it's been really fulfilling. It's been something, and I'm really grateful and appreciative of that.
Nice, nice.
Hopping off that real quick because we're actually in the midst of getting bigger into conventions and going to in person places. Jay and I are sadly, and not sadly, introverts. We we tend not to. Um,
Hey, same.
okay, okay, cool.
Same.
They're overwhelming, right?
Yeah, right. They're very.
Yeah, I
It's a
know.
very overwhelming space. So, um, are there any cons on the East Coast that you think we should check out? Jay is also an author and is gonna be debuting his debut novel in fairly
Mhm.
soon, among other projects. So, what cons should we be checking out?
You should absolutely check out, the big cons, WorldCon, which is like where the Hugo
Mm.
Awards are administered. I think this year it's in Glasgow, in Scotland. Then you've got the Locus Awards, which just happened recently. You've got Ridicon, which is in Massachusetts. I'm actually going for that. I'm flying out tomorrow for that
That's where we
because,
are. You're coming to us.
oh,
Yeah, we're in
okay,
Boston. Mhm.
okay, yeah. um, I'm blanking out now on the other cons, but yeah, there are a couple which are not too big, not
Yeah.
too overwhelming, and you actually have time to meet with other creators, other writers,
Mm.
and just network and exchange ideas.
Mhm.
Um, RadioCon is one of those cons. It isn't too big to flash like say WorldCon or something.
Okay.
It's much more intimate. There's one that happens in Florida, the International Convention of the Fantastic in the Arts,
What a good name.
ICFA.
Wow.
Great name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love that. As Miguel mentioned, I'm a writer and like this is gonna be my first big thing and I've been kind of inspired by different writers sometimes. Where like I'm like, oh, you're so good, and like it makes me want to be better. And I feel like you had a similar moment in one of your past interviews. So who are the creators, the artists, not even just writers, that kind of challenge you or influence you in your craft to want to kind of push it forward?
Uh, well, definitely Ursula Le Guin. I think she's a brilliant writer, even much more brilliant thinker. Her work is something I return to again and again,
Mm,
just for like inspiration, purposes for the purposes of craft. Um, Stephen King is also a phenomenal writer. I feel like, and I always say there's a difference between a writer and a storyteller.
mm,
So Stephen King is a storyteller. He's like the storytellers of old. He can take the most ludicrous of ideas and just make it work, and that's
mm,
something I always strive to achieve.
mm,
For prose, I think I always look to Ursula Le Guin more. Um, and then there's a couple of Nigerian writers, Amos Tutuola, who wrote my The Palm Wine Drunkard
mm,
and the My Life in the Bush of Ghosts.
mm,
Also for his um how do I say this? His imagination, unbridled imagination, really.
mm.
Mm.
Because I feel sometimes, writers want to you look at what's selling, what's commercial right
Yeah,
now,
Yeah.
and you just want to shoehorn
yeah,
your ideas and your creativity into something
never
generic.
works. Hmm.
Yeah. What I strive to do is create such a body of work that if anyone picks it up, you can't possibly mistake my writing for another writer. It's
Yeah.
so unique that you're gonna be like, yeah, Toby wrote this.
Mm.
This is Toby's work. Yeah.
Love that. Love it.
Yeah, I mean that's excellent. And kind of piggybacking off of you're talking about Nigerian authors that inspired you. I've seen in other interviews you've mentioned only writing about Nigeria after you left Nigeria. And
Yeah.
like I wanted to know, does writing about your birthplace gives you a sense of belonging and solace? For me, I know like I took like 23 years to go back to the Dominican Republic, and it was like a very when I got back, I was
Wow.
like oh okay, this all kind of makes
Yeah.
sense to me now, kind of moment. I was wondering if you had a similar thing.
Yeah. And particularly being away for so long, being in Russia, in a country which is like the polar opposites of Nigeria,
Mm,
really had me appreciating what Nigeria was, appreciating the time I spent growing up in Nigeria,
mm,
being around that culture, around people who, look like me, speak like me, think like me. And I found that in my fiction, I was trying to reconnect to that, thing
mm.
which I had lost at that point, being so far removed for such a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really resonates, as Miguel just mentioned, like his journey kind of going back to DR after this time. I had a moment like that in college where it was the first time, because I was like in the mountains surrounded by white people, that like, and my family's from Barbados, that I didn't eat the food. And it was just like such a simple thing of just like, for every week of my life, like sure I would have pasta, but I'd also have just like Bayesian food, and then all of a sudden I didn't, and it kind of
Mhm.
triggered this thing of just like this thing that was always a part of you for so long that you kind of take for granted, that
Hmm.
all
Yeah,
of a sudden you now have to be very intentional about, and also
exactly.
kind of rediscover your relationship or build a relationship even to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Growing up, I never appreciated. I mean, I'm writing about Yoruba gods now.
Mm,
That wasn't something I ever paid attention to growing up.
mm,
Because again, with advent of the colonizers, but also Christianity and
mhm.
Islam, these traditional religions were demonized,
Sure.
and so it's not something. I mean, even now in modern Nigeria, it's not something that's really. Um, the practitioners of these religions are sort of frowned down and
Mm,
looked down upon. So it took me, well, growing up, learning about and coming to appreciate my culture, my history, to
mhm,
find a newfound appreciation for these stories,
mhm,
and actually learning about them, enjoying myself to them, and all that.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So here at Playblack, we we take apart media from the perspective of artists of color, and we always got to know, like, what are you reading, what are you watching, what are you listening to, and how does it kind of play into your day to day? Let's start with what are you watching right now, if anything?
So I just watched the latest episode of The Acolyte. On yeah,
A
it's it's
great,
it's
yeah, we'll talk about it.
it's
Okay.
it's really good. I'm watching The Acolyte, House of the Dragon.
Mm.
I'm following
Yes.
that. Yeah, and then just for like background chatter, I'm rewatching Modern Family, which I
Mm.
absolutely
Mm.
love.
Mm. Yeah, I'm doing a
Yeah.
rewatch of Parks and Rec. That's my like comic
Oof.
comedy
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But since you brought up The Acolyte, our last episode was about The Acolyte. But
Okay.
honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, though, this last episode in particular um, dealt with themes, in my opinion, of colonization and religiosity, and that like this sect of people, and I think really interestingly, and it relates to your work. Um, I'm watching a lot of discourse about this show about the Jedi, right? And
Hmm.
because this is a very, I would say, morally gray depiction of Jedi. And
Yes.
some people seem to be wrestling with the idea that the people can be a part of an organization, and an organization can have its flaws, and
Hmm.
the Force can also be its own independent thing, and that the Jedi are kind of like this confluence of three things: of who the person is, of striving for the light, but also being deeply institutionalized, and kind of like how that comes up, and then knocking on somebody's door on some planet you don't know, starting
I
some
know.
whole mess, like
I know.
killing people. And so it's
Yeah.
just like the arrogance and ego of this. So I'm wondering, do you find kind of those parallels into your work as well? And how have you been feeling about it?
Those are some very astute observations, and it parallels really to like real world colonization, where
Mm-hmm.
you have this force, come to a strange place. You observe people who, have managed to live their lives for thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
really, and succeed. And they have this whole established order and culture, and you come from outside and you're trying to impose your own
Mm-hmm.
worldview
Mm-hmm.
and these other people, thinking they need saving. And it's eerily similar to real world colonization,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that it's really a very interesting exploration of that
Mm-hmm.
theme. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Acolyte. There are there are reasons to criticize the Acolyte. It's not a perfect show, um, but I think the reasons that people latch onto are very base, and kind of uh, heading towards othering or bigotry in a lot of ways. Um,
Hmm.
and it's interesting to see the parallels with how the characters in the story are feeling about others, and how a large part of the fan base also others themselves
Yes.
through the show as well. It's quite pot calling the kettle black, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
And having to confront too, and just to tie this back to Shadow of the Fall again, I thought a moment that was really profound was when Ashake was just like, "Oh, y'all are all in on this. Like, this was just like a
Hmm.
thing and a behavior that I had too much," and she didn't characterize it this way. I had too much integrity and like belief in this system that like
mhm,
I
Yeah.
never even thought to do this. But watching like these individual Jedi reckon with their guilt, their shame, the lies that they're telling me, and watching her kind of have that, and just think about how all these people, and they walk around with this like arrogance and power,
mhm,
like some of those
Yeah.
priestesses, and it's
mhm.
just like, yo, just out here lying. Like, where's that coming from? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's it, almost even like a step further is that the individuals, like say a character like Soul,
Mm-hmm.
have the best of intentions,
Right.
Mm.
which is why his character is so interesting, and it's why
Yeah.
Ashake is so interesting, because all Ashake wants to do is be accepted and be part
Yeah.
of this community and
The
not be
order.
othered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want, again, I don't want to get into any spoilers, but
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
glad we
Yeah.
got into this acolyte combo. Okay, what are you
Mm-hmm.
listening to?
Currently, I'm listening to Rema, so that's a Nigerian artist. His latest album it just dropped like a couple of days ago. I'm listening to that. I'm I've been, well, not listening, but I can't escape. Kendrick Lamar's Not Like
I
Us.
knew it
It's
was gonna come up.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
None of us can escape it.
It's everywhere I go.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
finds you.
And yeah, and I've just been listening to, I've got a jazz playlist on loop on Spotify. So I just listen to that when I'm doing some task or whatever.
Miguel's a jazz
Um,
pianist.
That I
well,
am.
I try. Yeah, okay, okay. That's, yeah.
When we get off, I'll actually. You know what? What are you listening to? Just so we can get a flavor, like artist specific, or
Oh, it's just a playlist.
Mm.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, got you,
It's
got
just
you.
a
Just,
vibe.
yeah,
It's one of those
just a
vibe
vibe.
things. Yeah,
As
yeah, a
most
lot like that.
jazzes, it's just a
Hmm.
vibe.
I,
Excellent.
chill vibe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And lastly, but certainly not least, what are you reading? What is inspiring you right now?
So I'm in the process of writing my full length novel, which I
Mm.
hope to be, what's going to be my debut novel, and um, it's it's going to be interesting. Let's say it's like I'm welding fairy tale, but also the Victorian novel, and it's, futures have deals heavily with like colonialism and empire and the whole slave thing. So like
Mm.
Peter Pan, loosely inspired by Peter Pan, but I'm reworking, Neverland to be like an island where the
Wow.
slave kids were, marooned and got their powers and
Mm.
all that. So I am reading Peter Pan in all its iterations, reading um Victorian novels to sort of get the feel for the
Sure.
language
Mhm.
of that time. But for pleasure, I just finished reading Wale Talabi's Shigidi and the Brass Head of Obalufon.
Mm.
Wale Talabi is also a Nigerian writer, and the book actually also features Orisha, the Yoruba gods.
Mm.
But he takes a very interesting approach. So not the traditional mystical, but this is where the gods of different pantheons have sort of, it's in the modern era, and people have stopped believing in them, so they've
Mm.
sort of gone corporate, right?
Mm.
So for each belief and prayer, each god gets like a share of the profits and things like, it's really fascinating.
That sounds really cool, and it's making me think of two more questions. I'm so sorry, Miguel. So,
No, you're good.
one of the questions, uh, I was talking to Miguel about the piece that I was working on, and it featured like kind of gods misbehaving, and Miguel had a moment of just like wrapping his head around. He's like, it's just they're weird to me because gods are God, right? And I was like, oh, like you're thinking of gods as like very omnipotent and like kind
Mm,
of in that place, but I always think of gods as like these very flawed people with power. And in Shadow of the Fall, I feel like I saw glimpses of that around oh, again, trying to avoid spoil. Yeah, I saw glimpses of just like not perfection, of mistakes being made,
mhm.
of falling prey to certain emotions. And so I guess I'm wondering what lens, what about kind of your thoughts around these deities kind of lent itself that direction versus the omnipotence.
um Story and conflict.
Mm.
If they were omnipotent and this, all powerful, mysterious, mystical beings, I don't feel like they would make for really interesting characters.
Mm.
And readers always want to relate to the story or the character that they read. Most authors will get complaints. Yeah, I couldn't connect to the character. I couldn't relate because there was no, I guess, human traits or
Mm.
unifying, universal human experience to latch onto.
Mm.
But flawed gods who are powerful but really like human beings, make for really really interesting characters, and you can tell thousands of stories with those kind of gods.
Mm.
And if you look at real world mythology, the gods are flawed
Mm. Yeah.
creatures. They aren't these all perfect beings.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Got it.
And you talked about seeing glimpses of that in the Shadow of the Fall. In
Mm.
book two, you're really going to see, you
Okay.
know, these flawed gods in all
Mm.
of their own glory, so
Got
to
it.
speak.
Messing things up for everybody. Okay. And last question, and we're not gonna like give context around it, but I think we think that you'll know where it comes from. If
All
you
right.
had the opportunity or the ability to see into the future, is that something that you would contend with or reject?
That is a very good question. Yeah. On the one, and I actually have thought about it. You know, it's on the one hand, I feel like, because if you think about it, each human being, well, for me, where I am now is when I look back to the past and the ordeals and the trials I had to undergo
Mm,
to get to where I am now, from this position, from this vantage point, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
mm,
But back then,
right.
the world felt bleak.
Yeah,
So if I knew, if I could look into the future and see that this was where I
it
would
works
eventually
together
end
for
up,
good.
I think that would have made the ordeal, that much more bearable.
Mm,
But at the same time, you don't want to look into the future and see something you don't like, because
mm,
it's just going to hang over your head forever,
mhm,
and then you can't really live your life in the moment and enjoy each experience. So that's a tough one.
mm,
I, I can't really say.
mm. Miguel, what about you? Would you want to see the future?
No,
Mm,
no, because I do think in a lot of ways it's a curse. Uh, I love Back to the Future. It's one of my favorite sci-fi movies.
Hmm.
And I always really loved how the spoilers for Back to the Future, how the third Back to the Future, um, it's very hokey and cheesy, but Doc is just like, your future is what you make of it, and you're always going to be changing it and growing it and making it happen. So stop
Hmm.
looking for how you stop looking 30 years in the head and start living in the present. That kind of
mm,
feeling. I've always felt like that is a good reason to never attempt to make a time machine.
mm. Yeah, love that.
So yeah, yeah. Toby, this has been a wonderful conversation. We could talk with you for
Mhm.
hours, bro. This has been great.
This has been, yeah,
Uh,
been great. It's been
um,
really great.
could you let the listeners know where they can find you, your socials, all that good stuff?
Yes, so you can find me at my website at tobiogundiran.com. I'm also on Instagram at Toby the Dreamer. I'm on X, Twitter for at Toby underscore the Dreamer. Yeah,
Nice, nice.
Excellent.
All right, everyone, please follow Toby there. Toby, we hope to have you back when the second part of this duology drops, and when your
absolutely.
novel drops, and when you just feel like it, just let us know. We'll be happy to have you. You stay on for a little bit and we'll debrief, but for everyone else, we'll see you soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.